During the harshest snowstorm the valley had seen in ages, a senior man living solo at the timber's edge awoke to a light scraping at his gate at 2:47 a.m. When he opened it, there was no resident, no voyager, just a fading cougar hauling her 4 chilled cubs onto his patio. But what truly chilled him wasn't the frost. It was the mark on her scapula, a notion he deemed he'd hidden forever. The initial thing Jack Whitmore sensed was the gale seeking to rip his aged shack off the flank of the peak. It wailed through the firs and around the roofs, a stable, irate yell that had been growing for cycles. The next noise he caught was the watch on the wall beating a bit too loud in the stillness amid blasts. The final audio did not fit in a tempest. It was mild, scrape, rest, scrape, scrape, as though something tiny and weary pulling its nails across oak. Jack stayed there in the gloom for a vast moment, his mind debating with his ears. Naught should be out there. Not in a gale like this. Not at this time. He spun his face toward the pink beam of the electric timer. 2:47 a.m. The wind battered the shanty again, shaking the glassy slats. The scraping grew a bit louder this time, a frail pressure right at the main door. Jack tossed his limbs out from below the sheets and felt the chill nip his nude toes, even through the aged timber base. His joints cracked, his spine grumbled the daily melody of a 61-year-old frame that had spent too many years in the wilds. He seized the cotton top from the stool, slipped into it, and pulled for the torchlight he kept on the sideboard. The squall had already cut the energy out about midnight. The lodge was relying on the log heater and a few cell torches now. Outside, the tempest flared like something vital. Scrape. This time it was trailed by a noise that made the fuzz on his limb stand up. A slim, ruined mumble. Not mortal, not a pup. Something stuck between a snarl and a sob. Jack's pulse rate speeded up as he walked into his shoes without hose and ambled down the brief corridor. The house was tiny, just 3 zones, and a deck made decades ago on the rim of the jungle near Yellowstone. He'd dwelt here solo since Linda passed. The muteness had become his associate. Tonight it seemed like it was keeping its breath. At the main door, he paused, one limb on the security, the other taking the torch beam. For a second, he weighed shunning it, letting whatever was out there meet its own luck. Any wise beast would have gone to earth hours past. Anything still active in this would be hopeless or ill or perilous. But that slim, ruined sound came again. Calm now? He mumbled more to himself than to whatever stayed on the other side. His speech echoed aged in the dark. We're moving. We're moving. He opened the lock set, pushed the links away, and leaned his scapula. When he widened the gate, the blast forced its path in, a slab of air acute as shard. Ice danced into the threshold, tossed askew, the gale screaming around the doorcase. The torch ray sliced through the mess in a thin prism of pearl. At first he saw naught but ice and shade. Then the glow fell to the patio base. Jack drew in a gulp that stung his chest. Slumped against the entrance part in the bank and part out lay a cougar. Not an African cat from some park, but a huge beige beast that should have been miles off in the wild country, not on his deck. Her flanks moved in slight, uneven gulps. Frost had shaped along her feelers and in the coat around her snout. Her foot soles were torn and gory, pushed into the ice as if she'd dragged the past few feet. And below her tummy, pushed close against her, were 4 tiny forms. For a pulse, Jack's soul denied to comprehend what he was viewing. The forms were all bad in the gale light, just small knots of hair and chilled ends and soft feet. Then one of them stirred. A soft shake of a face, a jaw gapping, and a silent yell. Cubs. 4 wild pups. They were rigid with frost, their hair coated with snow, their tiny frames hidden below their parent, as if she had been aiming to cover them with the end of her energy. One was hardly inhaling its flanks, shaking like a fading swan. "Good Lord," Jack breathed. He walked out into the gale, disregarding the bite on his skin. The cougar's gaze flickered open two dim golden bulbs in the gale. They joined his, and for a second, the yell of the gust died. There was no danger in that look. No mad terror, just fatigue so vast it seemed like defeat and some fact under it. Awareness. Jack's palm quaked as he raised the torchlight higher, letting the ray glide up her flank over the bones that peeked a bit too plainly across the scapula where the ice had thawed and reclotted. The glow found a mark in the hair there, a warped piece of wound fabric that went from just behind her nape down over the port scapula bone. A vast, grim mark. He recalled that mark. His joints bent a little and he nearly fell down right there on the patio. The squall came dashing back into his ears, but his intent had shrunk to that unique piece of harmed hide. "No," he gasped. "No, it cannot be you." A cycle's worth of restless eves and part-ended ideas smashed into him all at once. The yelling flame wall, the dropping logs, the scent of fumes so dense it filmed his enamel. The vision of a youth cougar caught amidst two blazing bases, gaze broad and mad. His sole speech from yelling into a device and over the gale. The hectic hustle to set her free haul, her out of that closing loop of heat, rotating his spine for 1 minute, to aid a downed fire slayer, and rotating back to locate her lost, leaving just gory trails and a smudge of hair on the soot. He had assured himself she'd dragged off somewhat and perished, that his aid had arrived too tardy, that the ache in her gaze, that final view she'd tossed back at him over her scapula as he tugged her free, had turned into a dull, solo demise in the gloom. The blame had rested on his torso ever since like a rock, and now she was here on his patio in the harshest gale he could recall. With 4 pups. Jack fell to his joints near her, the torchlight rattling to the planks. His palms went to the pups first, on sheer reflex sensing for soul, with digits that had done this too many cycles, with too many tiny ruined items. Their frames were dreadfully chill, but there were weak pulses, tiny quivers of inhale. The cougar's look tracked every motion. When his palm grazed her flank by chance, she didn't recoil, didn't snarl. She just gave out a deep, rasping noise that might once have been a thrum. Her face drooped a little nearer to the base. "Oh, darling." He spoke the terms coming out coarse and dense. "You hiked all this path, did you? You arrived right back to the sole idiot you knew." His sight dimmed. It took him a moment to grasp it wasn't just the ice in his orbs. He was weeping. Not the warm, irate drops he had wept at burials and flame walls, but a dull, weak flow that heated his faces and then iced in the gale. He arrived out with one quaking palm and placed it very softly on the cougar's nape, sensing the weak, pulsing throb there. "I recall you," he told, mildly tilting near so she could catch through the gale. "I recall that mark. I recall those orbs." The cougar flickered once calmly. Her look glided from his mask to the ajar gate behind him, where a polygon of pale amber glow oozed out into the gale, bearing the scent of groves and heat and soul. Then she moved her mass just a sliver, as if pooling whatever power she had kept. With a deep, aching groan, she shoved ahead a bit, prodding the pups with her torso. One turned crudely toward the entrance, its small nails scratching against the iced planks. She shoved again, chin-locked inhale, gasping, shifting them bit by bit nearer to the gloom, heat past Jack's shoes. He grasped, then she hadn't arrived for herself. She had arrived for them. Something in his torso split apart. The aged lodge, the tempest, the vast solo cycles since Linda's demise. All of it fell away, until there was just this parent ruined and fading on his deck and the 4 souls she was giving to him. "Fine then," he gasped out. "Fine then, I've caught them. I've caught you." He lifted up the first pup, sensing how thin it was, how terribly soft, then the next folding them near against his torso below his top, seeking to split what tiny heat his aged frame had. Behind him, the gale wailed, and the cougar slouched back, her face dropping to the planks. As he walked rearward into the shack, holding the quaking packs, Jack viewed once more at the mark on her scapula, the same mark he'd viewed through surges of fire and fume a cycle ago. The same beast he had missed to rescue now resting on his doorstep, because somehow she had trusted in him more than he had ever trusted in himself. He viewed that mark, and wept more than he had wept in 40 cycles. Then he slammed the gate closed against the gale and fled for the flame. 4 iced pups in his limbs, and a fading cougar staying on his deck in the gloom. The flame in the log heater popped soft and constant, stuffing the tiny lodge with a heat that seemed nearly fabled after the mayhem on the deck. Jack bent near the grate, stroking the 4 pups softly with an aged cotton cloth he'd heated near the embers. Their small frames quaked below his palms, some from reviving heat, some from dread, some from the brink of demise they'd loomed near for cycles. He acted calmly warily, the path he'd once treated hurt birds and deer during wild salvages. But these were wild pups. 4 wild pups who ought to have been dormant in a lair miles from here, draped in their parents' dense, vital glow, not resting on an aged mat in the house of a solo relict. Rearward ice kept on hitting the sides, the gale screaming in vast, rugged tones. Each few cycles, he found himself looking toward the shut gate, hearken for a noise from the cougar. He had hauled her within not long after the pups, placing her near the flame, but far enough that she wouldn't alarm if she woke. Her inhaling was weak, dull, but still there. That truth alone seemed like a wonder. Jack slid a palm below one pup's chin and raised its face briefly. Its orbs stayed shut, hairs iced jointly. The tiny being gave out a frail peep, a noise so minor and brittle it made Jack's gullet tense. "Stay in there, tiny soul," he breathed. "Your parents strove like doom to bring you here. The least you can do is give her some cause to strive for." The pup moved, shoving its snout into his hand. That small motion drew Jack back through a cycle he had tried so hard to erase. The recall came not in scraps, but in one crushing tide. The glow, the fumes, the yelling gale within the blazing forest belt. Jack hadn't wished to be there that day. He was meant to be dormant. Linda had ever told him he'd exit this realm in a flame belt one day, if he didn't ease off. After she passed, easing off had seemed worse than any peril. He took each plea, each turn, aught that kept him from the void home and the pang within it. The blaze that day had shifted like a vital thing, vaulting peaks, devouring fields within moments. Jack had been eyeing a length of downed furs when he caught something that didn't suit the yelling flame. A low, harsh yell, half rage, half horror, half ache. Not mortal, not aught he had caught from nearby beasts before. He tracked the noise through drapes of glow until he found her. A youth cougar, half held below two burnt trunks, her port scapula ripped open by jagged wood. Her coat was lined with soot, gaze broad and shiny with dread. She sought to stand when she saw him, her drives begging for flight, but the ache compelled her back down. Jack recalled the path she had viewed at him then. Not feral, not brutal, just afraid. Afraid and blazing. "Quiet, girl." He had spoke speech from fumes. "Quiet now. I'm here." Those same terms had come out of his gullet tonight, all on their own. He could still sense the heat of the fires as he'd moved his lever below the trunks, lifting one free enough to haul her out. She had yelled out a low, quaking noise that moved him more than the blaze did. He'd tossed his coat over her to stop some of the embers, ignoring the searing heat that burnt the cloth. And then, for a unique pulse, she had placed her face against his joint. Just a tiny, quaking brush. Not faith, not yet, but something near. A prayer. Jack had hauled her free of the blaze, pulling both of them into a zone of air where the fumes waned. He recalled yelling into his device for clinic aid, his speech breaking. When he rotated back maybe 10 moments later, she was lost. Limped off gore, staining each pace, vanishing into a wall of fumes. He'd sought until the blaze chief urged him to flee. Sunsets later, he hiked those hills again, seeking for any hint she'd lived. He never found print skulls or any mark at all. At last he assured himself she had perished somewhat solo. Tonight smashed that faith. Jack blinked drops as another pup moved feebly near him. He reached for a tiny dish of heated water and placed a bead to its mouth. The pup seized onto the heat tongue, darting, small gullet gulping. Ease flowed over him so acutely he had to fix his hand on the mat. "You're warriors," he spoken, "just like she is." He looked rearward at the cougar. She lay splayed near the distant side, her inhaling slight, but firmer now that she was out of the tempest. Her coat shone where thawed frost had seeped through. The mark on her scapula stood out in the flamelight, rough-closed, bad unique. "Why'd you arrive back to me?" he breathed. "Why recall me at all?" The cougar moved softly at the noise of his speech. One ear jerked slowly, sorely, her orbs opened. They were blurry at first, lost, but after a few gulps, they found him, and something in them, something aged and weary and known, became vital. Jack felt the same jolt as when he opened the gate, before only this time it was lower, calmer, woven with a woe he didn't have terms for. "You recalled," he spoke. The cougar flickered once her look moved to the pups, then back to him. A plain trade, yet the mass of it rested on Jack like a palm on his scapula. She was begging him to end what she had begun, to keep them vital, to keep her vital long enough to view them secure. Jack gulped hard and turned his focus back to the pups, stroking their tiny feet among his digits, heating them, forcing blood back into their limbs. One pup sobbed a small, ruined noise, and the cougar's frame coiled, though she couldn't stand. "You sleep," Jack told mildly. "I've caught them." He didn't know if she grasped, but he spoke it anyway, because stating it seemed like a vow he had already done without knowing it. The tempest flared on outdoors. The flame threw a tiny ember. The pups inhaled, jagged but vital, and in the faint, shaking glow of that shack, Jack sensed the history, and today blend in a path that made his torso hurt. A cycle past, he had pulled this cougar from the rim of flame. This eve, she had hauled herself to his gate through frost and doom, bearing 4 souls he now kept in his palms. He had freed her then. She was begging him to free her once more. And somewhat deep within his weary, cold, worn soul, Jack felt this was just the start. By the hour, the initial ash trace of morn started to leak through the iced glass. Jack's frame felt like it pertained to someone else. He'd stayed up with the pups much of the night, napping in brief, shameful bites, waking each time one of them sobbed or moved. The log heater had consumed through 2 whole arm heaps of cut fur. The shack air was dense with the scent of fumes, damp hair, and something feral that didn't fully fit, but somehow seemed fair. The pups were finer. Not out of peril, not by a vast reach, but finer. Their hair had dried into mild, jagged locks. Their feet no longer seemed like frost in his palms. They rest in a firm lump on the aged, woven mat tummies, pushed jointly, small torsos lifting and sinking in a beat, that had calmed over the past hour. Each now and then, one would jerk in its rest, hitting at some hidden item already dreaming of hunting. Their parent had not stirred much. She rested where he had hauled her near the side facing the heater on a pile of sheets he'd given from his own bunk. Her flanks lifted and sank dully, but the inhale echoed lower now, less like the final gasps of a fading flame, and more like embers seeking to burn again. Her orbs were shut. In the dimness, the mark on her scapula seemed like an aged stream curving and dim against the beige hair. Jack pushed himself up from the base, his bones grumbling. He sought new logs. He sought brew, and he sought to have a view outdoors. The tempest had calmed sometime past midnight, swapping its yell for a deep, firm groan. The ice still fell, but not in the lateral rage it had tossed against the shack before. Now it flowed down in thick, slow bits, mounding on top of what the gale had already left. Muteness pushed against the sides like another sheet. Jack slipped into his parka, pulled a cap over his losing hair, and seized the aged .30-30 gun from the shelf by the gate. Custom more than dread out here. You didn't walk outdoors in the dimness without some sort of safety. He opened the gate dully, letting in a slice of air so chill it made his enamel hurt. The deck was hidden below a new bank flat as a cloth on a morgue. The gale had carved the ice into odd, mild forms, as if the realm were a scenery made of cream. But the ice nearest the gate wasn't flat at all. It was ruined, stirred up, noted. Jack walked out the planks, groaning below his mass to stay, and raised his orbs. For a second his inhale held again, but for a diverse cause than the eve before. Prints they were all over, not just the deep, swaying path the cougar had left, hauling herself those final, frantic feet. Tinier marks circled them. Small crossing feet from the pup's former trials to walk before their power gave out. He could view where one had tripped, turned where the parent had looped back to push it ahead. The tail of their last coming to his gate was marked right there in the ice, but those weren't the prints that made his belly coil. Past the tiny, untidy group were wider, denser marks. Wolf. Jack walked to the rim of the deck gun, resting lost in one palm. He'd viewed lots of wolf marks over the cycles, but seldom this near to the shack, and never like this. The marks moved in a crude half-ring around his house, winding in and out among the logs, their ways merging and parting again. He tallied at least 5 unique sets, maybe more. They had come right up to the gap, halted, roamed, stayed. "Oh, doom," he mumbled. He tracked the path with his orbs, drawing it in the mild sunrise glow. The wolves had arrived from the north snouts, set to the smell of gore and dread and despair. The cougar's prints told a grim tale how she'd waned, tripped, pushed herself ahead anyway. The wolves had glided along near her path, just out of view, gauging the air, gauging her power. At one spot, nearly 30 paces from the woods, he saw where the ice had burst into mayhem. The cougar's prints grew deep there, nail marks, digging into the skin. Wolf marks crossed in a firm group, looping, pushing in, then backing. The ice was tinted with something dimmer, iced into brown spots. Jack's chin locked. He didn't have to be there to grasp what had occurred. She hadn't just fled the gale. She had strove her path through it. Somewhere in that spinning pearl doom with 4 semi-iced pups kneading on her. She'd spun and met a group that could have ripped her apart in moments. Maybe she'd leapt fangs out just enough to assure them she still had war left. Maybe she'd struck one on the snout, given it somewhat to recall. Whatever she'd done, it had served for a time. The path showed the wolves drawing back, parting again, trailing her from a gap like dim ideas. Jack stroked a palm over his face, sensing the grit of his rough chin. "You firm girl," he told below his breath. "You must have cowed the demon out of them." But he knew the fact. Wolves weren't fast-cowed, they were calm, they were hunters. When food was tough, they stayed. When food tripped, they shut in. His shack had been a mark they hadn't been ready to pass. Not yet. A deep noise rode the gale, then so mild he nearly lost it. Not the creak of logs or the sweep of limbs. A far-off tone, vast and slim. He kept his inhale. It came once more from somewhat deep in the woods. A tall, sad wail met a pulse, later by another, and then a third, deeper and coarser. They were still out there. Jack's digits gripped around the gun base. He had faced with wolves before back when he bore a shield and a suit. He honored them, even liked them in a path. But regard didn't shift the plain truth that to a needy cold group a frail cougar and 4 awkward pups were not signs of bravery. They were food. He stayed there more than he ought to, the chill biting up through his shoes, viewing his inhale float off in tiny mists, while the timber sounds died back into the huge silent. The air was starting to dim over the crest, making the gale mists into a foul rose blur. Rearward from within the shack came a soft noise, a pup, giving a slim, asking yell. It broke him out of his daze. Jack spun back toward the gate and walked inside, bolting it rearward of him, out of custom more than faith. A lockset wouldn't halt a set wolf, but timber and metal and mortal smell might make them weigh twice. The shift in warmth made his faces sting. He placed the gun back in its spot, hitting ice from his shoes, and moved to view his sick ones. The pups moved as he came near one of them, giving a small, restless mutter that made him puff a weary grin. "Yes, I hear you," he spoke softly. "Food true, same as each juvenile I've ever met." He bent and placed a palm against the cougar's side. Her hair was hotter now. When he pressed his hand there, he sensed the dull, stable beat of her soul, as if in reply her eyelids flickered open. For a second he spoke, naught, just met her gaze, the faint echoes of the wolf wails still ringing in his ears. "They were on you," he told her mildly. "They tracked you all the path here." Her pupils shrunk briefly, as if she grasped the form of peril in his speech, if not the terms themselves. Her orbs flicked toward the gate, then back to him. "Well," Jack went on his speech, harsh but stable. "They're not getting you here. Not while I'm living." The vow stayed in the heated air like fumes. He wasn't sure who he was trying to assure her, the pups or himself. Maybe all of them. Outside, deep in the snow-laden woods, the wolves settled into their own kind of waiting. Within the shack, a retired ranger, a fading cougar, and 4 brittle pups met the long day ahead, bound together now by something past dread. They were no longer just guests passing through each other's realm. They were for this gale, and whatever came after it, a single shared line between life and doom. For the next many cycles, as the gale dully eased its hold on the peaks, Jack worked within the shack with the quiet focus of a man who had spent half his life caring to the hurt. But even while his palms moved across the pups' small frames, heating them, checking their inhaling, his mind kept drifting back, pulled by some hidden wire to the spot where this eve had started for the cougar. The lair, the cave in the gale, and the impossible trek that had led her to his gate. While the pups slept and the cougar dozed in weary fits, the room dim and warm around them, Jack found himself staring into the flame and viewing not fires, but recall. Recall not his own, but the kind he built together from the hints she had left in the ice. He could almost sense it the moment the world had turned against her. Somewhat miles north of his lodge, the gale had broken suddenly over the crest line, dropping the degree in a horrid drop. Gales yelled down the hills, tearing at aged firs, moving free limbs that hadn't moved in decades. The timber base had moaned under the mass of the tempest's first wave, then failed. Jack pictured it as plainly as if he'd been standing there himself. The cougar wound around her pups in a small lair below the curve of a downed cedar, her frame arched over them, her inhale heating their tiny faces. The pups were only weeks old, soft, awkward things that didn't yet grasp peril. For them the realm began and ended in the safe beat of their mother's soul. Then the cedar had moved. A snap, a rush of cold air, and the roof fell. Jack saw her leaping without pause, taking the closest pup by the neck, hauling it through the falling ice while the others cried out behind her. He saw her dig her feet bleeding, breaking through to the second pup, then the third, then the last, all four vital, all quaking, terribly pushed against her as she braced her broken scapula against the gale. The gale wished them gone. Life didn't bargain with infants. Jack let out a slow inhale, picturing her trying to scan the realm through ice dense as wool. No shelter, no cover, no heat. Only the cold surety that if she stayed where she was, all four pups would die in less than an hour. And that was when recall had found her. Not smell, not drive, recall. Jack's speech, the glow of his jacket as he covered her in the fire. The rough kindness of the palms that freed her from the burning logs. The odd being who had borne her out of doom instead of leaving her to it. And somewhat through the whiteout, she had recalled a path, a scent, a heat, a man. Now Jack could see the first paces of that grim trek. The cougar limping from her old wound, lifting the weakest pup softly into her jaws. The ice nearly consumed her. The banks were already knee-deep for a man waist-deep for her. Each pace must have felt like wading through ice that wished to swallow her whole. 17 miles in a gale that could end a deer in moments. Jack stared at the cougar now asleep on his sheets. Her feet jerked in some dream he could not know. He gulped hard. "You should be gone," he breathed. Aught in that gale wished you gone, but she hadn't passed. She had hiked. He imagined the second trip. After dropping the first pup somewhat near a sheltered rock or shallow ice bank somewhere, she prayed it might live a few moments. She had turned and gone back for the others. The gale would have erased her prints almost instantly. She must have steered by recall alone, fighting the numbness creeping into her limbs. Then the third trip, her power failing her in hail, burning her hurt scapula, screaming under the mass of ice. And on the fourth turn, when she'd come for the last pup, the biggest one, the loudest one, Jack could see it perfectly. The wolves showing as shades first, then forms closing in at the rim of the gale. He saw her lower her face, baring her fangs, placing herself between the wolves and her baby. The group gauging her, looping, biting at the air, seeking for flaw. She must have strove with aught she had her bad scapula taking hits it couldn't afford. And yet she won, or at least lived long enough to flee. Jack stroked his temples, sensing the mass of it settle behind his eyes. "You hiked through doom," he spoke, "and doom tracked you the whole path." He looked over at the pups again. They slept in a knot of feet and soft inhale warm under the sheet he laid over them. They had no hint what their mother had done, no hint how near they had come to passing below the ice or in the jaws of wolves or in the cold somewhat between the lair and his gate. He stood slowly, stretching his sore spine, and walked over to the cougar. Kneeling near her, he eased one palm under her chin, sensing the weak heat of her inhale against his wrist. Her hair was softer now that it was dry. "How did you grasp I was still here?" He spoke. The cougar did not wake, but her ear jerked the faintest hint of awareness. Jack let his hand rest against her face. "I don't know what you recalled," he said softly, "but I vow I'll make it serve well." A blast of gale shook the frames. Ice fell off the top with a heavy thud. Somewhat far off in the woods, a wolf met the gale with a solo wail. The cougar moved at the noise, a faint snarl rising in her throat before waning again. Even semi-conscious, she was still guarding them. Jack stood slowly looking from mother to pups, then to the frosted glass. The trek had ended at his gate, but their strive for life had only begun. And as he threw more logs into the heater and watched the fires rise, he grasped something plainly for the first time. If she could hike 17 miles through yelling doom without quitting, then he sure as doom wasn't going to quit either. Towards midday, the snowstorm had waned into a slim, firm snow, the sort that fell softly, as if seeking to atone for the eve before. But within Jack Whitmore's shack, the gale had left its trace on aught. On the quaking pups huddled jointly below the cotton sheet, on the semi-conscious cougar, splayed across his aged rugs, and on Jack himself, whose face seemed a bit older in the flamelight than it had the day past. The heat rising from the log heater dully pushed back the chill that had seeped into the shack's bones. Jack bent on the base near the pups, checking each one with palms that were mild despite their coarse hide and thick joints. He'd spent a life caring for hurt beasts, but never somewhat like this. Never a being that could grow into a hunter firm enough to break his bones with a lone stray blow. Yet here they were, tiny and brittle, needing solely on him. And here he was, unable to dream, doing aught but aiding them. The tiniest pup, the small one with a white spot near its snout, gave a tiny peep when Jack raised it. He heated some goat's milk on the stove just enough to take the chill off, then dipped his digit in and pushed it toward the pup's mouth. The pup seized on weak but firm. Jack breathed a long, slow gulp of ease. "That's it, darling," he spoken. "You keep that up and you'll be leading your kin around in no time." Behind him, a scratch of nails echoed against the planks, mild but surely from a mature beast. Jack turned his face just a bit, not wishing to alarm her. The cougar had moved. Her front foot coiled weakly. Her inhaling deepened. She raised her head a bit, then let it drop back once more as if the mass of the earth rested on her nape. When she blinked open her orbs, they were blurry with fatigue but clear enough to hunt the room for her pups. "They're right here," Jack told mildly. "Safe warm. I vow." He didn't know if she grasped the terms, but she grasped his sound. Her look softened, weary, dense, but calmer now. The cord in her scapulas eased. She gave a low chuff, nearly like a cat's thrum dragged through stones. Jack set the sated pup back below the sheet with the others. Then he moved to the cougar, sinking himself to his joints near her. "Let's have a view at you," he spoken. The harm along her scapula, an aged wound from the fire, had been worsened by her strive through the gale. The hair around it was lined with dry gore. Her foot soles were a mess, ripped open from roving through ice and stone. He dipped a neat rag in heated water and let it rest on the wounds for a pulse. To his surprise, the cougar did not recoil. She viewed him the path she had viewed him in the burning woods a year past. Firm, wary, but with somewhat deeper glowing behind the amber in her orbs. "You're letting me do this," he told below his breath. "I didn't await that." He dabbed the harms, warily easing off ice and grit. When he pulled for the balm, the cougar raised her face, tracking the motion of his hand. That tiny task told him more than any yell or snarl could have. She trusted him. Once more, still. "God divine." Jack spoke speech, breaking a bit. "You arrived here believing I could mend this, didn't you?" A soft sob came from behind him, one of the pups shifting below the sheet. The cougar sought to rise at the noise, her foot sliding across the oak. She managed to raise her chest halfway before her frame gave out. She slumped with a sharp groan, panting hard. "Quiet," Jack said, fixing her scapula with both palms. "Stay down. Let me aid you." But she didn't wish aid. What she wished, what she sought, was to be near her pups. She sought again, hauling herself ahead inch by inch, her good foot scratching the base. It was a sad sight, and Jack felt his gullet tense. "Wait on," he said fast. He seized one of the sheets near the stove, folded it twice, then softly slid it below the pups like a makeshift mat. They cried as he raised the rims, pulling the sheet a few inches toward their parent. When the pups came near enough for her to scent them, the cougar breathed a quaking gulp that echoed ease and giving up all at once. She dropped her face to the sheet, poking the closest pup with her snout. It sought to climb toward her chest, hitting crudely at her hair. She shut her orbs as if that tiny brush bound her to the realm. "There you go," Jack spoke. "That's finer, isn't it?" He walked back to give them room. The cougar coiled her tail around the pups as best she could, though she lacked the power to collect them rightly. They moved in closer, all four pushing against her belly, drawn by the weak beat of her soul. The sight of them, parent and pups, joined at last, hit Jack harder than he thought. It felt like viewing somewhat holy, somewhat old, that had lived by pure will. He leaned back against the wall and stroked a palm over his face. "I don't know how you made it," he spoke. "Lord knows I wouldn't have." He stood slowly and moved to the cooking bench, pouring himself brew from the aged enamel jar. The first sip burnt his tongue, but he didn't care. He sought the heat. He sought somewhat common in a morn that felt aught but. A quick tap, sharp and fast, hit the gate. Jack nearly dropped the jar. For a pulse he thought of wolves, though wolves didn't tap. Then he knew the noise. Mortal fingers. He cursed below his breath and ran to the gate, looking back at the cougar and her pups. He seized the gun, not to scare, but to avoid being caught. When he opened the gate, a blast of cold air blew in, with a young lady wrapped in a ranger's coat, her face red from the gale. Emily Chen, 28, keen, firm, too candid for her own good, and the final soul he wished to view right now. "Jack," she said, breath clouding in the air. "Are you all right? We saw fumes during the gale and—" She halted. Her orbs moved past him and grew wide. "What is that?" she spoken. Jack walked ahead, blocking her view. "Emily, listen." "Jack," she said, speech tightening. "Tell me that's not a cougar in your main room." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Her face grew pale. She lowered her speech to a harsh whisper. "If the office finds out, if Wild Control hears even a hint, Jack, they'll kill her at once." Behind him, a pup gave a tiny sob. The cougar moved weakly. Emily's look moved dread, giving path to chaos, then awe. "Are those infants?" Jack bowed once, slowly. Emily gazed at him, the gale pulling at her coat, ice bits catching in her dark hair. "Oh, Jack," she spoke. "What in God's name have you gotten yourself into?" He viewed back toward the cougar, her weak frame coiled safely around her pups. Then he viewed at Emily, standing there with law in her orbs and care marked across her face. "What I've gotten myself into," he told mildly, "is a vow." He walked aside just enough for her to view the scene fully. The fading mother, the sleeping pups, the flamelight wrapping around them like brittle gold. "Aid me," he spoke. "Please just aid me, keep them vital." Emily stayed hushed for a vast period. Then she locked the gate behind her, blocking out the chill. "Very well," she mumbled. "Let's hide your enigma." Emily walked dully into the lodge, her shoes shedding ice onto the aged timberwork. Her exhale still slight from the jolt of what she'd just viewed. Jack shut the gate behind her, barring out the chill and pinning her into a riddle she hadn't sought for, but now couldn't walk away from. The heat within hit her like a slab. The scent of cedarwood blazing, the dim odor of feral beast hair, and below it all the keen steel rim of parched gore. She made 2 paces nearer, then paused once. The cougar rest splayed across Jack's sheets, her inhaling slight but firmer, her flanks lifting in a dull, fatigued beat. The pups coiled against her torso, small frames moving below the cover Jack had placed over them. Emily had viewed much in her sow cycles as a warden-hurt deer, lonely fox pups, the untidy rigors of life, but never this. Never a feral beast resting in a male's house, as if it had picked him. Jack. She spoke as if afraid her speech might break the brittle calm in the zone. This is fabled. Jack stroked a palm over his weary orbs. Speak me about it. No, you don't grasp. Emily took a quaky inhale. If souls from feral office catch you've got a cougar inside your lodge, they'll end her. Jack ended for her. I grasp. Her orbs flew to him. Then why didn't you cite anyone? Why didn't you device for aid? Since she didn't arrive here for them, he told plainly. She arrived here for me. Emily gazed at him as if he'd just spoken another language. Jack didn't blame her. If he hadn't lived through the last 24 hours, he wouldn't believe it either. She made another pace ahead, sinking herself to a crouch near the pups. One of them stirred its tiny foot, reaching blindly toward its mother's side. Emily's face softened just a sliver, but enough for Jack to view the conflict in her orbs. They're so tiny, she spoke. They shouldn't even be moving yet. They weren't, Jack said. Not truly, she born them. Emily raised her head. Through that gale, Jack, that tempest ended a herd of deer up near the crest, and she hiked 17 miles. Jack bowed bon times. Emily gazed at him again, doubt dully giving path to somewhat like awe. She rose to her feet, folding her arms over her torso as if trying to hold on to a sense of logic. But logic had no spot in the warm glow of that fire with a dying hunter rest at her shoes. What do you want to do? She finally asked. Keep them vital, Jack said. All of them. That wasn't my query, Emily replied mildly. What do you expect me to do? Jack met her orbs. Aid me, make sure no one else finds out. Emily opened her mouth, shut it, then let out a long inhale. Jack, this is banned. All the way banned. A wild beast in bondage, mainly a hunter. I'm not keeping her bound, he told. She arrived here. She put her pups in my palms. That's not bondage. That's faith. The words stayed in the air, warm and dense. Faith. Emily looked down at the cougar again. Her look softened, the warden drives within her, shifting into somewhat kinder. She moved nearer to the parent, keeping her motion slow and planned. The cougar flicked one ear, viewing her through half-shut orbs, but made no move to stand. She's dried out, Emily spoke poorly. I know. And her foot soles. Emily bent, viewing the cracked, bloody soles. These are iced. She might lose parts of them. Jack gulped. Just tell me what to do. Emily stood rubbing her palms on her pants. First we treat her feet, then we get those pups sated. And after that, she paused. After that, we plan how to keep this from becoming a doom term for all of you. Jack nearly bent with ease. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Emily said mildly. If anyone from the office comes by for a welfare check after that gale and finds this, she shook her head, your whole land could be taken, and I could lose my badge. I won't let that occur, Jack said. You might not get a choice. As if called by her terms, the device clipped to Emily's belt popped with noise. A man's speech came through the noise, thin and low. Team 3, do you hear we're doing Gale Pass scans on all warden posts? State within the cycle. Emily paused. Jack felt his belly drop. They're arriving here true, he asked. Emily bowed slowly. Fixed rule after a gale like this. They'll check each shack, each post. They'll want view on you to make sure you didn't get iced in or hit by a tree. We can't let them see her." "No," Emily agreed. "We can't." She turned toward the cougar once more, her mind already acting, gauging the risks. "We'll need to block the glass," she said, "and keep her quiet. And those pups." A small pup let out a faint, needy sob, its speech echoing through the lodge like a tiny alarm bell. Emily's orbs tightened. "They're too young to stay hushed." Jack felt a shielding heat rise in his chest. "Then we do whatever it takes." Emily walked to the glass and pulled down the dense old wool sheet Jack kept for cold crises. She hit a few nails into the wall with the heel of her shoe, blocking out the glow from outside. "We've got 1 hour," she said, her speech speeding. "I'll hide the other glass. Jack, get more sheets over the gate and keep her cozy. If she seeks to rise or snarls, we're done." Jack bowed and moved fast, vigor pushing aside fatigue. As he worked, the cougar raised her head again, viewing him. Her look was clearer now, more aimed. She saw the motion, saw Emily, saw the pups, saw the hasty setups, but she didn't alarm. She only pulled the pups closer with the last bit of power she had, folding them against her torso like jewels. Emily turned, saw that act, and gulped hard. "She truly does trust you," she spoke. Jack stopped, his palm resting on a nail he'd been about to hit. "No," he spoke. "She trusts us." Outside, the gale had finally died. Inside, the watch ticked down the cycles until the tap they all feared. The cougar shut her orbs, her inhaling calming. The pup moved softly below the sheet. Emily fixed the last cover over the glass. Jack stood guard at the gate, hearkened for motors in the ice. All of them hushed, all of them staying, all of them linked jointly now by a riddle no soul could ever afford to ruin. Towards the close of the third date, the tempest had at last slackened its hold on the canyon. The air spanned broad and dim, rinsed pure after the snowstorm's fury, and the realm outside Jack's lodge lay buried under a thick, hushed sheet of white. The pack had ebbed back into the woods, leaving just their marks like ghost signs in the banks. The wardens had done their scans and moved on none the wiser to what Jack and Emily had kept hidden behind those wool-covered glass. Within the shack, the cougar was firmer. Not well, not yet, but firmer. She could raise her face without quaking. She could shift her mass enough to pull her pups nearer, though each motion still cost her. The pups, now heat-fed and eased, had located their speech. Their mutters filled the lodge with small, bright noises that made Jack's tired soul feel somewhat he hadn't felt in a long time. Wish. By the morning of the fourth date, Jack knew it was time. "We must get them outdoors a bit," he told, mildly bending near the cougar. "Just for some task, some air." Emily, sitting on a stool by the heater, eyed him over a jar of brew. "It's still chilling, Jack." "I know." He stroked the cougar's scapula softly, "But those pups can't grow up on a mat, and she needs to move, or that scapula will lock up." Emily paused. She wasn't wrong to worry. A mature cougar outdoors, even hurt, was still a wild beast. But when she viewed at the cougar who met her look with a quiet, fatigued calm, she bowed. "Brief hike," Emily stated. "A few cycles, then we bring them back in." Jack smiled, just a tiny, tired rise of his lips. "A few cycles is all I'm hoping for." He opened the gate dully, letting the chill seep in, and for a pulse, none of them moved. The cougar smelled the breeze, her ears turning ahead. Somewhat in the fresh scent stirred her some recall of peaks and gale and space that didn't belong between four lodge walls. Jack walked out first, crunching into ice that reached almost to his joints. He reached his hand, not touching her, just offering a path. Move on, girl, he spoke. Let's view the realm again. The cougar pushed herself onto her shaky feet. She wavered at first, almost sinking, but then she fixed her fine limb below her and rose. The pups peeped in chaos as she moved, their tiny heads popping up from the sheet before falling over each other, trying to track. Emily lifted two up. Jack picked the other two, and together they bore the pups to the deck. The cougar walked into the ice as if it were somewhat holy. Her feet sank deep, but she didn't seem to care about the chill. Instead, she inhaled the air like she had been holding her breath for dates. Her tail moved once, a slow, frail arc that still held a hint of pride. Jack set his two pups down softly near her feet, and Emily placed hers near them. The cougar dropped her face, nudging each one as if counting them again. Then the coaching started. The pups tripped through the ice, unsure at first, but the cougar pushed them ahead. They pressed tiny feet into the banks, peeping at the chill, jumping back, then trying again. She watched their each move with a focus that made Jack's gullet tense. Even semi-broken, she mothered them firmly. When one pup slid on a firm piece of ice, falling onto its side, the cougar took one frail pace ahead, but her limbs gave out. Jack acted without pondering, lifting the pup up before it slid further down the slight slope. The cougar paused. Emily paused. Jack paused too, but he still held the pup. For a long pulse, no soul breathed. Then the cougar viewed at him, not with dread, not with fury, but with somewhat that nearly seemed like awareness. She blinked once dully, then eased her face down to the ice, resting it there, as though admitting that for this pulse he could aid her. Jack's lungs at last freed their breath. "It's fine," he spoke to her. "I got him." Emily gazed. Did she just let you do that?" Jack set the pup back near its kin. "Seems like it." "That's not common, Jack. Not about this is common." The cougar watched as her pups explored the tiny gap in wobbly, shaky paces. Each jerk of her cords spoke of drive. Stay near. Guard. Teach. She led them the only path she could, nudging them, hurting them, letting them climb over her. After a few cycles, she tested her own power, sinking into a crouch and trying to pull her hurt limb. The cords quaked with strain, but she held the spot long enough for the pups to copy her. Small frames leveling into awkward prey poses. Emily's speech softened. "She's coaching them how to hunt." Jack bowed. "She's a parent. Even fading won't halt that." But then the weather shifted in a pulse. A blast of gale flew down from the crest, more chill and acute than before. The cougar quaked hard, her limbs bending below her. "That's enough," Jack spoke, walking ahead. "That's plenty for the day." He reached for the pups again, and this time the cougar didn't object at all. She watched him pick up each one, trusting him, the path she had trusted him in the fire a year past. The path she had trusted him enough to bear her pups through a gale and lay them at his gate. When she leaned toward the shack, trying to track Jack, and Emily walked on each side of her, leading her softly back within. Her frame bent with fatigue, the pulse she crossed the threshold, but she didn't fight. She slumped onto the sheets with a low, tired moan, the pups coiling around her belly nearly at once. Jack settled near her, brushing ice from her hair. "You did well," he spoke. "You did truly well." The cougar breathed a long, quaking gulp, the kind that echoed both ease and giving up. Her pups nuzzled into her torso, tiny tails moving. Emily watched from near the heater, arms folded, speech very hushed. "Jack, she trusts you fully." Jack bowed his face dully. "No, not me." He viewed at the cougar, the brave, ruined being who had hiked 17 miles through doom because she believed in only one thing left in the realm. She trusts what I done for her once," he said softly, "and she's wishing I can do it again." Outdoors, the ice shone below a chill azure air. Within, the flame popped. The cougar shut her orbs, circled by her pups, and at last fell into a deep, mending sleep. And Jack Whitmore sat near her, knowing in his bones that the next phase of their strive for life and their strive to stay hidden was coming nearer with each quiet heartbeat. Vernal arrived dully to the highlands, as it ever did. Not in a sudden tide of green, but in tiny firm signs, liquid starting to murmur below the ice of the brookbirds, testing their voices in the brittle morning air spots of brown soil showing through the receding ice like aged marks. By then the cougar could walk without tripping. The limp never left her fully, that burnt scapula and those torn soles had seen to that. But she shifted with a quiet, wary poise, never losing a pace. Her pups were not truly pups anymore, but long-limbed youths, their feet too big for their frames, their orbs bright and keen, and just a bit feral. Jack had begun leaving the shack gate open on the milder dates, letting the kin drift in and out as they wished. At first they stayed near to the deck, playing in the bare spot where the moved ice had thawed fastest. Then dully the cougar started to lead them further down to the belt of firs behind the lodge, then up the hill toward the stony peak that viewed the canyon. He watched them whenever he could, from the deck, from the kitchen glass, from the shade of the log pile. The cougar would look back now and then, to be sure he was where she awaited him to be. There was a pact amid them, unsaid but firm. He would watch over the gap and the aged logging path where the wolves often passed, and she would take care of aught past. The coaching never ceased. He saw her show them how to stay still when the wind moved, how to blend into the cover of rocks and brush, how to fall low and move in that rolling, hushed path only big cats could manage. He watched her bring down a winter hare one dim evening, then walk aside and let the pups clumsily find their path through the task of ending what she had begun. It was untidy and awkward and needed. "That's how you build a hunter," he spoke to himself, standing solo on the deck, one hard lesson at a time. Cycles passed that way. The wolves never came near again, though their wails flowed down from the crests now, and then signs that the forest still had its own laws. Emily visited when she could, ever parking her van further down the path, ever checking the woods before she came near. She aided with what she could. Med's Good's quiet company when Jack's ideas strayed too far into aged woe. "You know this can't stay," she told him one midday as they watched the cougar lead her young along the woods. "I know," Jack said, and he did. He saw it each time the pups tested their limbs a bit further from the shack, each time their mother let them roam just outside her direct reach. Wild items were not meant to circle a mortal home forever. They were meant to move, to claim, to vanish into their own souls. The farewell arrived on an eve so calm it seemed as if the entire canyon was hearken. Jack had been napping in his seat by the heater, an aged sheet pulled over his limbs when he woke with the shaky sense that someone was viewing him. The fire had burnt down to embers, tinting the room in low red glow. The watch said 3:02 a.m. He caught it then, that mild-known scratch at the gate. Not the frantic scraping from the tempest eve, not the hopeless plea of a dying parent, but a lone, planned touch. Jack stood slowly, his heart already knowing. He slid his feet into his shoes and opened the gate. The air outdoors was cold, but mild, lined with the scent of damp soil and thawing fur. The moon hung low and full, throwing a pale path of light across the gap. She was there. The cougar stood at the base of the deck steps solo. No pups tumbled around her feet, no small forms pressed against her sides. She looked firmer now than she had the eve she arrived, but there was a mass in her orbs that he grasped. He had seen that look in the glass the date he buried Linda. Jack walked out onto the deck and sat down on the top step, not wishing to loom over her. For a long time, none of them moved. "You got them this far," he said softly. "That's more than most get." Her tail moved once. She sat down as if in reply, her frame pointed toward him, her face high. In the moonbeam, the mark on her scapula shone like an aged piece of cord laid over smooth hair. "I guess this is where I tell you I'll be fine." Jack went on his speech, low and a bit shaky. "And you tell me the same in your own path." The cougar studied him. Then, with a slow, planned motion, she blinked both orbs at him at once. It was the kind of blink a house cat might give a trusted soul, that soft, brittle shutting of the orbs that said, "For just that pulse, I am not on watch against you." Jack gulped the lump in his throat. "Thank you," he spoke, "for coming here, for believing I could aid. You gave an aged man more aim than he's had in a long, long time." She rose, then turning toward the logs. At the rim of the gap, she paused and looked back over her scapula one last time. Their orbs met feral gold and tired blue, and then she slid into the gloom without a noise. Jack sat on the deck for a long while after she was gone, hearkened to the faint rustle of the woods, the far murmur of the brook, the pang in his own chest. He let the woe come, and with it somewhat softer that felt a bit like peace. Summer came and passed. The ice on the peaks ebbed, then returned. The wolves sang their tunes on chill, bright eves. Life went on as it ever did in the peaks, swapping one term's toil for others. He saw signs of them now and then, marks along the crest, a pure kill spot, where somewhat firm and adept had fed well a flash of beige motion deep among the logs, but he never went hunting. This time letting go meant staying away. It was in late autumn, with the first thin frost coating the grass, that they came back. Jack was piling logwood by the hut when he felt it, the prickly sense of being viewed. He straightened, dully wary not to make any sudden moves, and turned toward the hill that rose past the gap. They stayed there on the peak, 4 of them in a line. Not pups anymore, not quite full-grown. Lean, corded young cats, their coats dense against the coming chill, their forms sharp against the pale air. They were too far for him to see their marks or their orbs clearly, but he didn't need to. He knew them. They didn't come closer. They didn't call out or pace or make any move that might be mistaken for begging. They simply stood side by side, viewing down at the tiny shack, at the mail in the yard, at the slice of life they had passed through once on their path to becoming what they were meant to be. Jack felt his orbs sting. He didn't bother wiping the drops away. "You did it, girl!" He spoke below his breath, not sure if he was talking to the cats on the hill or the recall of their parent. "You got them there." One of the young cats moved its mass, moving an ear. For a pulse it seemed to raise its face a bit higher, as if noting somewhat only it could view. Then, as hushed as they had shown, the 4 of them turned and walked along the crest, their frames blending into the logs, until naught stayed but the recall of their forms against the air. Jack stood there solo, the chill creeping into his digits, a quiet grin pulling at the corners of his mouth. The pang in his chest was still there, but it had shifted. It wasn't just loss now. It was thanks and a strange, humble pride. The cougar had trusted him once in flame. She had trusted him again in ice. He had done what he could, and now her gift moved through the wild on 4 firm sets of feet, owing him naught, owing the realm aught. That eve, as he sat by the heater with a jar of brew cooling in his palms, Jack viewed at the empty mat by the grate and felt no urge to fill it with aught tame. Few loves, he realized, were never aimed to stay. They were meant to arrive like a gale, rip your life open, and then move on, leaving you with new marks. Yes, but also with a new path to breathe. Out past the glass, somewhat in the gloom, 4 young cats hunted below the stars. And in the tiny lodge on the rim of the forest, an aged man at last grasped that sometimes the kindest, bravest thing you can do for somewhat feral is exactly what that cougar had done when she put her pups in his palms. Should this tale moved your soul even a bit, I would love to hear from you. Just put a plain one or even a nil in the remarks. Ought. Thus I grasp, you're here hearken and splitting these pulses with me. And if you would wish to link me for more real soul-moving tales like this one, move ahead and enroll. There are so many treks ahead. Tales of bravery, faith, and rare links staying just near the turn. I would be proud to take you with me for the next one.